CEO Kwon seemed interested in hearing the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon and opened his ears to listen to what Yoo Ji-ha was going to say. Yoo Ji-ha became hesitant with his decision to say the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon. Meanwhile, CEO Kwon seemed angry that Yoo Ji-ha was wasting his time. Yoo Ji-ha was frightened as he looked at the angry face of CEO Kwon, who threatened him heavily. CEO Kwon was looking forward with excitement when Yoo Ji-ha would reveal the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon, but despite saying so, Yoo Ji-ha actually didn't know what the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon was. After recalling the description of Seo Joo-Heon, Yoo Ji-ha wasn't even sure if Seo Joo-Heon had a weakness in the first place. One of his subordinates threatened Yoo Ji-ha with his knife when Yoo Ji-ha wasted too much time, but the voice of someone was heard from the other direction. It was Julian, who just came there. CEO Kwon was distracted when he saw Julian, who came now to loot this tomb of wrath. Julian then explained that when he used the Zhujuliang relic earlier, Julian found that one of the members of the Seo Joo-Heon team was in critical condition. CEO Kwon still did not understand what Julian said, but Julian said that the Seo Joo-Heon team was now under a curse and all of them were separated. It explained why Yoo Ji-ha was alone here and Seo Joo-Heon was also alone now. And that's the reason why Julian came here, and he expected a good information from CEO Kwon. But CEO Kwon didn't understand why Julian was planning to attack Seo Joo-Heon when he was working for Seo Joo-Heon and refused his contract. But Julian denied CEO Kwon, saying that he was friends and had a contract with Seo Joo-Heon. Yoon Si-woo, who was behind him, confirmed Julian's words because he saw for himself when Seo Joo-Heon and Julian fought before violently. CEO Kwon smiled at Yoon Si-woo's words, and with that, they both had the same mission to attack their enemy Seo Joo-Heon. CEO Kwon offered a cooperation with Julian to attack Seo Joo-Heon. Because previously, Julian said if he knew where Seo Joo-Heon was now, and with that, CEO Kwon asked Julian to guide them, and they would soon hear the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon from the mouth of Yoo Ji-ha. Julian agreed to the offer given by CEO Kwon to attack Seo Joo-Heon, but Julian said that they had to move quickly now, because if they waited longer, the curse on Seo Joo-Heon would weaken and his team members would regroup. And with that, they decided to move while listening to the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon from Yoo Ji-ha. CEO Kwon and Julian prepared to move to the place where Seo Joo-Heon was. Julian also forced Yoo Ji-ha to stand up and stop complaining because Julian intended to save Yoo Ji-ha. Yoo Ji-ha was a little annoyed at Julian's words. Julian even considered what happened to Yoo Ji-ha as a reward for the bad deeds they did. Julian also asked Yoo Ji-ha to think about what he would say about the weakness of Seo Joo-Heon, but Yoo Ji-ha thanked Julian because thanks to him, Yoo Ji-ha was still alive. But it seems that on the Seo side, they were not so lucky because Gildal could not find Seo Joo-Heon anywhere. Irene, who was worried, tried to use the relic she had. It turned out that Irene took out the relic that she had used in the past when Seo Joo-Heon was in the Tomb of Lust. Although the relic used ambiguous words, but they could use the information they got. Seo seemed hesitant when Irene started using the relic because there was a possibility that they would be caught. Seo was a little impressed when Irene was willing to take risks like what Seo had done earlier. Irene placed the relic on the floor and she asked Seo to keep watch. With that, Irene began to open the relic book and channeled a little of her power. There was yellow energy around Irene when she used the relic book. After that, they both waited for a while until they could make sure that they were not caught. Seo was surprised when she heard Irene screaming full of fear, and quickly Seo went to Irene. Irene said that if Seo Joo-Heon her body was trapped with a rope, Meanwhile, Irene had been worrying about nothing though. Seo calmed her down by saying that it might be the rope relic. Seo told Gildal to look for the rope relic and Gildal seemed to agree. Irene had fallen into jealousy as she remembered that Seo Joo-Heon was always near the rope relic. Irene was even crying now as her mind thought that Seo Joo-Heon preferred the relic over humans. Seo became a little affected by Irene's words, but she tried to calm Irene down as Gildal was coming soon. Seo seemed to doubt herself as she was affected by Irene's words. Seo couldn't accept that she should be jealous of the rope relic other than Irene. Meanwhile, Seo Joo-Heon, who was being talked about, was still silent in the coffin. His relic had tried various ways to open it. Nero, who saw the rope relic in trouble, asked him to step aside because he would also try to get Seo Joo-Heon out. Nero intended to burn the coffin and would make Seo Joo-Heon free because of the melted coffin. Without thinking, Nero had released his fire to burn Seo Joo-Heon and the coffin, which made Seo Joo-Heon scream in the heat. Seo Joo-Heon scolded Nero because if he was really going to burn his coffin, then he would burn first. Seo Joo-Heon was surprised as he saw several notification windows appear in front of his eyes saying that Seo Joo-Heon had 5 minutes before he finally went to the afterlife. And with that, several hands appeared with each carrying a torture device. Seo Joo-Heon felt anxious and panicked now that she couldn't do anything. Seo Joo-Heon violently hit the coffin and asked someone there to open it, but it seemed that the relics didn't know what they should do. The hand came closer to Seo Joo-Heon's face and prepared to start the torture, but before that, Seo Joo-Heon heard a voice from a relic that he recognized. It turned out that the one who was talking was the worm relic. He seemed to offer his offer to Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon asked what would be part of his offer, but the worm relic instead played games with him when the situation was getting precarious in the chest. The worm relic mentioned his first offer, which was all the wealth of Seo Joo-Heon, and the second was all the relics owned by Seo Joo-Heon. The worm relic seemed to ask Seo Joo-Heon to give up all his wealth, then all his relics. Seo Joo-Heon was upset because he was trapped and had no other choice. Even the worm relic wanted to move to someone named Elisa because Seo Joo-Heon never paid his salary. Seo Joo-Heon was angry at the worm relic because the agreement was unequal and seemed very unfair. The worm relic scolded Seo Joo-Heon, who did not want to be helped by him even though he was willing to give the opportunity. But before the worm relic could finish his words, he was stepped on by the feet of Seo Seo Joo-Heon could recognize the angry voice. Seo Joo-Heon tried to call out to Seo who was still stepping on the worm relic. Irene approached the origin of Seo Joo-Heon's voice, which was inside the coffin. Seo Joo-Heon was relieved because now she could meet someone she could talk to, while the angry Seo waited for Seo Joo-Heon's order to punish the worm relic. Seo Joo-Heon explained that the worm relic knew how to open the death chest, and Seo Joo-Heon also said about the unfair offer that the worm relic made before. Seo and Irene were seen threatening the worm relic with a sharp gaze, after which they both mistreated the worm relic. The worm relic, who was now in a bad state, would help Seo Joo-Heon to get out by casting a spell. Seo tells the worm relic to say the spell so that Seo Joo-Heon can come out. The worm relic does what Seo tells it to do, and as the spell is recited, Seo Joo-Heon can see a light coming through the crack of the coffin, after which the coffin opens, and Seo Joo-Heon manages to get out of his misery. Irene moved to hug Seo Joo-Heon, but the rope relic preceded her. The rope relic was seen wrapping itself around Seo Joo-Heon. Irene was worried about Seo Joo-Heon, but it seemed that Seo Joo-Heon was fine. Seo Joo-Heon explained that she was trapped in the coffin and the rope relic was trying to get her out. Irene then said that they could find out the whereabouts of Seo Joo-Heon by using her relic that said confinement, body, rope, Seo Joo-Heon explained that the first point referred to her being trapped in the coffin, while the last 2 points referred to the mummification process that Seo Joo-Heon almost experienced. Irene was very happy to hear Seo Joo-Heon's explanation because everything was not as bad as she thought. After Seo Joo-Heon managed to get out, she intended to find Yoo Ji-ha. Seo suggested to use Gildal to find Yoo Ji-ha just like she did to find Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon was happy to hear that and asked Seo to do it. While Gildal was away looking for Yoo Ji-ha, Seo Joo-Heon was seen doing some checks on the relic and everything seemed to be in good condition. Seo Joo-Heon was seen looking at the 2 girls and thinking about how to lift the curse. After a while Gildal returned and brought unpleasant information. Seo Joo-Heon was surprised to hear Yoo Ji-ha together with CEO Kwon. Seo added that Yoo Ji-ha was discussing about Seo Joo-Heon's weakness. Seo Joo-Heon realized that Yoo Ji-ha was moved right where CEO Kwon was. Seo Joo-Heon was sure that Yoo Ji-ha wouldn't talk about his weakness because Yoo Ji-ha didn't know about the crow. Seo called Seo Joo-Heon, who seemed to be still planning. Seo said that Julian was also with CEO Kwon. Seo then said that they were all discussing Seo Joo-Heon's weakness. Seo Joo-Heon is worried now because if Julian uses Zhujiang, then he will be able to know the aura possessed by the crow and really know his weakness. Seo Joo-Heon doesn't understand why Julian is there with CEO Kwon. Seo is seen pulling the hem of Seo Joo-Heon's shirt and whispering to restore Julian's memory because he thinks it will prevent things from happening to him. Because he thinks it will prevent worse things from happening in the future. Seo Joo-Heon slightly agrees with Seo's opinion, but he is not sure if it will go smoothly, because there are all things about him and Julian that do not match, and it will only make a fight. Seo Joo-Heon thinks of the bad things that will come back when he returns Julian's memory. But Seo was sure that it would help because Julian was now working with CEO Kwon to attack Seo Joo-Heon, and that was why it was necessary to stop by bringing back Julian's memories. Seo Joo-Heon finally agreed to use the relic when she met Julian again. Irene seemed worried about what happened to Yoo Ji-ha. Seo Joo-Heon just calmed her down and said things that Irene could not understand. On the other hand, there were a lot of people from TBM who were walking. Yoo Ji-ha was seen among them, who glanced at Julian in front of their Yoo Ji-ha was not sure if Julian had a good plan to do. CEO Kwon asked Julian about the whereabouts of Seo Joo-Heon. Julian said that they would not lose track of Seo Joo-Heon when he saw CEO Kwon, who was getting suspicious. Yoo Ji-ha even doubted a little if they would not be caught by CEO Kwon, and suddenly there was someone's voice calling them all from behind, making everyone turn their heads. There was Seo Joo-Heon standing with a smile on his face. Yoo Ji-ha didn't understand why Julian was guiding them correctly towards Seo Joo-Heon, but Julian didn't do anything like that, which meant Seo Joo-Heon was deliberately looking for them. CEO Kwon greeted back Seo Joo-Heon, who didn't seem to care about it. Because his goal is to come here to meet with Julian, Julian doesn't understand why Seo Joo-Heon is looking for him, but Seo Joo-Heon mentions about Julian working with CEO Kwon to attack him. Seo Joo-Heon will never forgive Julian, but Julian says that all of this is just a misunderstanding. CEO Kwon seemed happy when he saw Seo Joo-Heon and Julian start to fight each other. And with that, CEO Kwon allowed Julian to face Seo Joo-Heon directly. Julian snorted in annoyance, and he explained that the two of them did not need to fight. But it seemed that Seo Joo-Heon didn't want to listen to what Julian said, because Seo Joo-Heon had made his decision before he came here. With the preparation, Seo Joo-Heon accelerated directly towards Julian, preparing to attack. Seo Joo-Heon took out his relic sword, and Julian with his speed was able to avoid slash after slash launched by Seo Joo-Heon. Julian seemed to want to talk to Seo Joo-Heon, but unfortunately Seo Joo-Heon did not want to hear anything from Julian. CEO Kwon was very happy to see the two of them attacking each other. Yoo Ji-ha wanted to stop Seo Joo-Heon from attacking Julian, but he couldn't think of anything. Julian seemed to be overwhelmed now, but he made his decision by taking the initiative to attack Seo Joo-Heon. The attack from Julian was apparently aimed at holding back Seo Joo-Heon's sword speed. Julian was seen still holding the sword of Seo Joo-Heon. When the two of them faced, Julian seemed to explain that he only pretended to cooperate with CEO Kwon, because if he did not do that then Yoo Ji-ha would die at the hands of CEO Kwon. Seo Joo-Heon, who heard that, understood that everything was just a misunderstanding. But Seo Joo-Heon didn't care about that. And with that, a huge explosion occurred as Seo Joo-Heon increased the intensity of his attack as well as Julian. Everyone there covered their eyes to avoid the dazzling light. When the glare occurred, Seo Joo-Heon used the relic Munin's tears on Julian. Julian, who did not have time to dodge, was hit by the attack from the Seo Joo-Heon relic, and immediately his head experienced tremendous pain. Julian screamed in pain and slowly his past memories came back. Julian saw the events of his past when, and there he saw Seo Joo-Heon, who was angry with him, also seen the moment when the two of them were arguing about CEO Kwon. There was Seo Joo-Heon who wanted to sacrifice himself so that Julian could take everyone out. There were also many monsters in front of them. But did not wait long. Julian saw Seo Joo-Heon, who ran crashing into the crowd of monsters. Julian slowly began to remember if Seo Joo-Heon had sacrificed for the safety of all of them. Seo cried seeing Seo Joo-Heon, who was about to sacrifice himself. But Julian restrained the movement of Seo, who wanted to help Seo Joo-Heon. Although Seo tried to protest, but Julian did not listen to it. Even though they managed to escape for a while, the monster continued to chase them, making Julian inevitably have to use all his strength to hold back the monster. Julian was seen telling his team to get out of here as fast as they could while Julian held back the monster. Julian faced enemies that he could not defeat because of the large number of them, and ended with him dying in that room because the rats there ate his body. Julian had returned to the present, but he was very nauseous and vomited there. Seo Joo-Heon called Julian, who was surprised when he managed to get his memory back. Julian saw Seo Joo-Heon, who stood in front of his eyes, and asked what happened exactly, but Seo Joo-Heon chose to remain silent. CEO Kwon sounded angry at the two of them who stopped fighting. Julian was surprised to hear the voice of CEO Kwon. Meanwhile, CEO Kwon was still angry with his subordinates for seeing Julian, who just fainted for a while. Julian recognized the voice, and he stared angrily at CEO Kwon. Julian used all his strength and saw several subordinates of CEO Kwon who were stung by the electricity released by Julian. Seo Joo-Heon saw them suffer with a smile on his face, seeing Julian, who attacked all the subordinates of CEO Kwon. Seo Joo-Heon saw success when he knew that now Julian had used all his power to destroy CEO Kwon's subordinates. Yoo Ji-ha didn't understand what happened to Julian, who suddenly got angry and wanted to attack CEO Kwon. But Julian ignored the words of Yoo Ji-ha because he had business with CEO Kwon. CEO Kwon seemed to try to awaken Julian by saying if they were working together to kill Seo Joo-Heon, but Julian gritted his teeth and said if CEO Kwon had betrayed him first. With a powerful attack, all of CEO Kwon's subordinates were defeated by Julian. Yoon Si-woo said there was a possibility that Seo Joo-Heon had controlled Julian's mind, but unfortunately, before he could finish his words, Julian had struck him with his electricity. CEO Kwon looked annoyed at Julian, and CEO Kwon challenged Julian to come and attack him. Seo Joo-Heon just watched from a distance and smiled with the success of his plan. Seo Joo-Heon told Yoo Ji-ha to run away, but he was surprised to see what Yoo Ji-ha brought. Seo Joo-Heon smiled happily as Yoo Ji-ha picked up the relic of the fallen TBM member. Seo Joo-Heon told Yoo Ji-ha to stay away from this area, because Seo Joo-Heon intended to destroy the ground and use this opportunity to get rid of them all. Although Yoo Ji-ha was hesitant, but Seo Joo-Heon was sure that Julian would find his own way out. They were both surprised when the ground under their feet slowly crumbled. There were several cracks in the floor they were both standing on, and with that they both fell into a hole that did not know how far they would fall. Seo Joo-Heon, seeing them fall, was relieved and chose to leave the area. Seo Joo-Heon invited Yoo Ji-ha to meet Irene and Seo-Ah, who were waiting for them upstairs to go to the relic room together. But Seo Joo-Heon's eyes caught a relic that he recognized in Yoo Ji-ha's hand, a sword relic that was familiar to him. Seo Joo-Heon was able to recognize the relic sword in his hand, which was the relic sword of Liu Bei. Upon hearing the word Liu Bei, Yoo Ji-ha seemed to remember something, and he told Seo Joo-Heon that Julian was weak to the relic from the Three Kingdoms. Yoo Ji-ha had an idea to use the relic to hold Julian with the power of the relic that was his weakness. Seo Joo-Heon was happy to get a useful relic like this. What will happen to Julian and CEO Kwon? Will Seo Joo-Heon make it to the relic room?